Christian is well, the character I play, Christian, is a very um interesting, complex guy, as you charitably would describe any character that you play. I would say that Christian was very. It was clear to me from the beginning that he was very lean. It was clear to me from the beginning that Christian was very lean on the page. When I first read the script, when Mark sent it to me, it was like with the Yeats excerpt in the beginning, it just like drew me in. It was so incredible, and it really hit me very. I didn't even want it. I just threw it across the floor. I didn't even want it in the same room as me. It was just hit me so deep, and I hadn't talked with Mark at that time, but I knew that he had me in mind for Christian. So I was like, who is this guy? Like, this is either a really noble cautionary tale that I would do anything to be a part of, um, which Christian plays a very enigmatic role in, or this person's crazy and I'm about to meet with the serial killer. And so, but after speaking with Mark, it confirmed sort of the former, which is that, it's drawn from real life, anecdotal stuff, people he knows, experiences that he's sort of absorbed, and I knew that it was shining light on exploitation that was very real. And Christian's character, um, I could tell because of the scarcity of dialogue for him compared to, for example, Kyle and Christian's characters that, sorry, Kyle and Danny, he that his tonal contribution would be pretty important. And there was this sort of, you and I have talked about it, where I think it was sort of like an American Psycho, slightly heightened reality. I think partially because ideologically and culturally there's such a disparity today between Silicon Valley and what is the mundane, quotidian, everyday of people who don't have like a ton of money and are immersed in tech and have that sort of like concentrated power that's agglomerated in this geography over a very short period of time. And so I saw him as being symbolic in that cultural sense, and so that would be slightly heightened, sort of his larger than, he'd be massive in some ways, right? But there needed to be sort of like a grounded, like, this is a real person who, you can just Google the sorts of things that Google execs and consultants at, top firms, and those who sort of are attached to this industry and this wealth, the intersection of tech and entertainment and media in the Bay Area. And it's not just like sleeping around on Tinder. It is like really, it's like, really affluent people partying with meth, or it is like coked up solicitation of sex work, solicitation of sex workers. That's a really ironic statement, but like this sort of stuff. And so I just wanted to kind of get really deep with it. And so, and my living there, I think kind of like helped that. Yeah, I do think that there is a significant contemporary and thematic, uh, culturally thematic vein in it that speaks very strongly to where we are right now. It's essentially, the film is like a meditation on power, um, and identity, without kind of pandering to identity politics per se, because it's very much grounded in who's Danny, who's this very real person who comes from a more traditional Midwestern, maybe more conservative family, where he didn't find that he belonged fully. So he like went to a more metropolitan, cosmopolitan place, being the Bay Area, a coastal geography, with like a lot of money, a lot more exposure to culture and the world and all that, but is also has a jarring difference in said social reality, and so he's there. And so I think for a lot of people, like today, given the huge migration of people from less wealthy, less populated areas to places like New York, San Francisco, you know, LA, whether it be like from a moving from the Midwest or just like commuting from Oregon, so that you can kind of uh, make a livelihood for yourself. It's like it is a meditation on power and identity and how those things can, you had more power maybe initially where you were, and your identity was more stable. But once you've entered this like new place where there's so many people who meld and interface with other people, their sexuality is more fluid, their idea of themselves is more fluid, and they're much more consumed by like abstract ideology, whether it be politics or whether it be, like software, or whether it be things are just like less stable in general. It's like everyone's molecules are vibrating faster, and people tend to feel like they project their own identities onto other people, in a sense, in a way that can be like open and altruistic, but can also be really hegemonic depending on the intention of the person. So someone like Danny, someone like Christian, may have started out like Danny. And I feel that, like, I have a friend who comes from like what he calls like, bumfuck Western Texas, and like is like extraordinarily smart and like has just such perception into the world and like curiosity toward the world. And how that manifested when he was younger was he just beeline straight for like New York, and he ended up spending a lot of time around wealthy people. He happens to be gay, and like there's a sort of like twink identity that was introduced to his world that he sort of felt like he had to subscribe to, because he was he was able to like dine out and talk with interesting people and go all sorts of places, like at the coattails of established men. And he told me how he compromised his values and his identity in a lot of ways, which I think is really meaningful, and became a version of himself that he really just seemed really alien. And I can relate to that in some ways, just in some moments of my life as well. And so I tend to think of Danny and Christian as potentially, like, why does Christian understand Danny so well? Like, why is he able to like read him? So like, why is Danny so transparent to him? Why is there this sort of like incisive, efficient, like deadly effective, incorporating him into this like very dark scheme? And it's like he chose the Sith. you know Working with Mark Schwab was an enormous privilege. Mark is someone who clearly cares very deeply for the world, and doesn't is uninterested in diluting how he thinks of and feels about the very contentious time and world that we live in, especially in this country, especially in the day-to-day lives of people who he identifies with, that being like men, gay men, although this isn't like exclusively a queer narrative in any way. I think there's like this really poignant universality to it. So Mark doesn't compromise. He's an artist. We're going through an indie renaissance right now. He's very much he sought out like actors both in LA, I mean, as well as from the Bay Area where he is, and cast and crew, and he brought together like this really bootstrapped, hardworking group of people who just like were all. I mean, you can really tell a lot about an artist and a person, and from the company they keep, and I was just so impressed, like from day one. Obviously, from on first interaction with Mark, and from reading a script to speaking with him, to when Tim and him and I, him and I, we met at the cafe for the first table read. To the first day on set, all the way through wrap, it was just like everybody was all about the work, all about the work, all about the work. We're here for it. We understand the narrative. I felt I was worried about being like brooding or being actory or like unfriendly, but it was such a huge departure from who I was, and I felt very safe and able to take that risk because I so badly wanted to serve the story that fucked me up inside. Like I so badly wanted to serve it because it's an important narrative that needed to be told because it's about really important stuff, with capital I, but also very much a narrative that's just like a story that's so compelling, I think. It's an awesome story. I mean, it's like really, it just grips you. It grips you. The cinematography by Dante is really. I'm like talking about it like a film critic, but it's actually it's a visceral sort of thing where you go in and it really just like pulls you in. You're immediately invested in what's happening with Danny, and you're also there is no sense of there are moments where you're like a half step ahead of him, and so you're sort of so in a classically horrific sense, you kind of there's a sense of foreboding that's there, but you don't know what's going to happen. So it's like it's just as like as a thriller, it's like so well put together, and it's just like an absolute joy to watch. Obviously, our ensemble is it's just yeah.